Every so often, you get a little cash injection, some of your own money back from the federal government in the form of a carbon tax rebate. But are you getting enough? Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. Okay, Lorrie, so not too long ago, Canada's parliamentary budget officer came out with a report on the cost of the carbon tax to individual Canadians. And the findings there were Canadians are obviously putting out more than we're getting back. None of us are surprised, but the Liberals cried foul and said, no, you included this number and should have included that number. Very confusing, but break it down for us because the PBO has a new report. It wasn't vindication for the Liberals.
Well, no. What happened here was that the parliamentary budget officer done a previous report. There are two components of the carbon tax. There's the federal fuel charge and there's the large emitter carbon tax. The federal fuel charge is the consumer tax, which is what we're all paying. That drives up the price of gasoline, drives up the price of natural gas, and little discussed, drives up about 20 other forms of fossil fuel energy costs, all of which we end up paying at the end. So what happened was the PBO acknowledged a few months ago, okay, you know what? When I said it was the carbon tax, I only meant the federal fuel charge component. So then the Liberals went, aha, the parliamentary budget officer is wrong. Most people do get more money because of the rebates than they pay. And the PBO has just basically went through everything, confirmed what he had in the last report, because the main cost to us is the consumer fuel charge. And what he says, as he has said for years, is, and the Liberals are deliberately misleading on this, so let's do the distinction. The PBO agrees with the government that when you only look at the fiscal impact of the federal fuel charge, that's dollars in, dollars out, most families end up better off. But when, as the case is with any tax, when you look at its negative impact on the economy, what it does, lowering investment, lowering salaries of people, when you combine that, the economic impact with the fiscal impact, then no, 80% of families don't end up better off. In fact, most families end up worse off. Now, to be fair, at the lower income level, because it's a progressive tax, the PBO agrees that people end up better off. But the Liberals have, for years, have kept saying that the parliamentary budget officer says that 80% of households in those provinces that pay the federal carbon tax, the only two that don't are Quebec and BC, so they don't get rebates. In the provinces that pay it, basically most families, as income rises, the carbon tax rebates don't cover. And really, at the end of the day, there's been so much nonsense about this. If there was a magical tax that when you pay it made most people better off, then why wouldn't you just make that the only tax?
Yeah. The unicorn tax, Brian. I think that that's one of the challenges, certainly that the Liberals are facing, is Canadians just don't believe them when they say you're actually going to receive more than you're putting out. I mean, that's not an easy thing to measure because every family spends differently, and different companies have put different transferred some of that cost over to the consumers in different capacities, different industries, but Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, has said very clearly the next election, likely October 2025, he wants it to be a carbon tax election. Does this enhance that argument for the Conservatives, or are the Liberals able to cherry pick one or two things to make their case that no, a price on carbon is appropriate?
The Liberals are going to ignore this and continue to say, no, the parliamentary budget officer says 8 out of 10 families are better off. Because that's what they were doing before the PBO said, oh, there's a mistake in the math. You know, this report has been out for a long time. Lorrie and I have written about it, talked about it. It's been raised in Parliament constantly, and the Liberals would just deny it. And they'd say, well, don't you believe the parliamentary budget officer who says 8 out of 10 families are better off? They would just pretend that this report doesn't exist. But I would actually dispute even the 8 out of 10 families. It only worked if you followed the government math, because how do they arrive at what you paid in the carbon tax and what your rebate should be? Averages. And they look at what it costs to heat the average home. They look at what it costs the average person in extra fuel based on how much they drive. And so one of the averages that I like to point out is they say the average person only drives 15,000 kilometers a year. I don't drive 15,000 kilometers a year because I don't drive that much. I'm a downtown urban elite. But Adrienne, how many kilometers do you put on driving to all the sports games, basketball, baseball, everything, driving the kid to school? Suburban families are paying a lot more. And that has been the case from the beginning. What this report shows is that the more well-off you are, the more you're paying. And you don't have to be that well off to start paying more. And in some instances, we're talking about $2,500 a year that this increased tax is going to cost you in both terms of what you pay and lost income, all of it. So this is bad news for the Liberals, and it's more ammunition for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And the polls would show that Canadians aren't believing what the Liberals are saying. They're believing their own lying eyes, as they say.
Well, Lorrie, what's interesting about either the Liberals' argument that, the 8 out of 10, or the Conservatives' argument that everyone's getting walloped, we see the truth somewhere, not even in the middle, but very much close to what the Conservatives' argument is. And as Brian points out, Canadians feel that. They sense it every day of their lives. Every time they walk out the door to go to the grocery store or whatever the case may be, anything to just keep their household maintained. That disparity is growing. That gap is growing in terms of affordability, in terms of cost of living. And all of this sort of mixed in together. I mean, I know the Liberals would like to parse out, this is what you're paying for this. No. It's not how it works in a household. That's not reality. And so we feel it, and we feel the squeeze and the pinch every day. So I fail to see how they can take anything in this updated report, use it to their advantage, particularly when Canadians have already decided it's time for a change. And sure, we will have an election based purely on the carbon tax. What do you think?
Well, you remember when this blew up the last time? The parliamentary budget officer is in committee and they're questioning him. And he goes, you guys know this is going to lower Canada's economic growth. It's in your own numbers.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you won't let us talk about those numbers. And then there was a whole brouhaha. And then it came out that the federal numbers showed that over time, remember, this tax is rising every year until 2030. We don't know what's going to happen after that. I think it's about $85 per ton. It's going to be $170 per ton in 2030. And then the government says it doesn't know what it's going to do. Well, no, you're going to keep raising it because you have to hit these targets. But the government's own data, they knew when they were babbling all this nonsense that, like any tax, it causes a negative impact on the economy. That doesn't mean you don't tax anything. We need taxes. But so it's just reached the level of farce. What I've followed this from the beginning. I followed it from the very first report of the PBO, who only looked at the fiscal impact. And that's the one the Liberals selectively take out. And what he said at the time was, okay, I'm looking at the fiscal impact, dollars in, dollars out. Yep, government's right. About 80% of people, households do better. But I'm going to have subsequent reports that look at the economic costs, the GST impact, because it's not revenue neutral. We paid the GST on top of the carbon tax, and that's not rebated to people. So to me, what it is you have an honest civil servant who has tried to be, who is fair. He doesn't mislead the public. He says, look, yeah, I get the government saying fiscal impact 80%. That's right. But when you add in the economic impact, 60% of households, at 60% of households paying more than they get in rebates, you're hitting the middle class. The very group that Trudeau says he's dedicated to making life easier for. So to me, this is just a case of an honest civil servant. Now, he's not a shrinking violet. He doesn't like it when his credibility is attacked. I mean, he comes back at them. But, if you're scoring it in a boxing round, 10-0 for the PBO.
Well, Brian, last word to you on this. Regardless of who becomes president in just under a month's time, if it's the Democrat or the Republican, there's no intention of the United States putting a price on carbon. They're not implementing their own national carbon tax like we do have here in Canada. We've already discussed how adverse economic impact this is having on a country like ours, which is already struggling in terms of jobs, in terms of growth. And so I'm wondering, moving forward, up and until we do have a new government, this tax is going to go up again, is it not, in a year's time? In under a year's time?
Every April 1st, it's going to continue to rise. The Liberals love their escalator taxes, be it on the carbon tax or on alcohol. You know, they've got a number of them that go up every year. And this is just one more. And that is a very good point, because the Liberals get up in the House of Commons and they act as if the only way to reduce carbon emissions is with a tax. And yet there's no carbon tax in the United States. There's no carbon tax in China. There's no carbon tax in India or Russia or other major emitters. Just Canada, with, what is it, Lorrie? 1.6% of global emissions come from Canada. But we are hammering ourselves with a carbon tax. Yeah. It is hurting people. And just another stat out of Stats Canada, the income gap in this country is widening. It is the widest it has been since they started collecting this data in 1999. We've got shrinking GDP per capita. The economy is not doing well for the middle class and those working hard to join it. As Justin Trudeau would say, he promised to grow the economy from the heart out. The economy is having a heart attack right now.
Just one final point. The Liberals, the carbon tax, the Liberals themselves, when you look at their program, say that the federal fuel charge is not the major way that they're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They say, and they don't keep track of how much the carbon tax reduces emissions, but they guesstimate that when you combine the federal fuel charge with the large emitter carbon tax, it'll be about a third responsible of the emissions. So they're saying 2/3 of the emission reductions don't come from what they say is the most efficient way to reduce emissions. And the other thing is, Trudeau keeps saying, and the Liberals keep saying, well, no, we're using the carbon tax as opposed to more expensive methods like government regulations and subsidies. Absolute nonsense. They have the carbon tax and they have the regulations, the clean fuel regulations, the clean electricity regulations, the methane emission regulations. So they have the regulations and they have the subsidies. You remember the tens and billions of dollars that Ontario and the federal government and other provinces are giving to subsidize the electric vehicle industry that they say. So in other words, what they say is the most efficient way of doing it, carbon tax, they say it's not the major thing they're using to lower emissions. It's
posturing.
It's a communications train wreck. It really is.
Well, will it be a carbon tax election as the Conservatives want it to be in 2025? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.